We're now going to move on to the panel to get deeper dive into this idea of hidden values. I want to remind you that you can use Slido. We're going to be using that for asking questions on this panel, so please make sure you check it out, sli.do, to get onto the website, and the code is beyond with a capital B space conf. Oh, you're already here. I was going to introduce you and big you up and make you sound amazing. I'll go. No, I'm going to introduce you because you deserve it. Chanuki Seresinhe is going to be leading this panel for us today. Chanuki is a data science researcher at the Alan Turing Institute and the lead data scientist at Popsa, which if you were here yesterday, you would have heard her telling you all about. She formerly worked as senior data scientist at Channel 4, and her research entails using big online datasets and deep learning to understand how the aesthetics of the environment influence human well-being. Welcome, Chanuki, and do enjoy the panel. Please give them a big round of applause.
Yes, if you haven't submitted questions, please do. So I'm really excited to be chairing this panel because it's a topic I'm very interested in. It's about discovering valuable insights in data, and not only data that's readily available, but also data that we might not have realized existed, for example, with stories of people. And we're also going to be talking about how the data discovery path is not always a straightforward one and might sometimes lead to unexpected but great discoveries. So I think we're just going to crack on. So just to start with, what are the challenges of actually getting valuable insights from data? If you just, okay. And you can define data in any, in a broad way.
Well, I think the interesting thing is when we started collecting data, we didn't even realize we were collecting data. We just thought we were collecting listings. But we realized at the time that we needed to put a bit of thought into it. So one of the first things we realized that actually with every single event that we collected, we were beginning to create a cultural record for the whole of the UK. It started off just with Edinburgh and Glasgow, then became Scotland, but then became the UK as a whole. And when we were putting together our database, we went and sought as many different people with different experiences as we possibly could. So we spoke to people who were involved in ticketing. One of the really interesting conversations we had was with Glasgow University, who were experts in the field of archiving. And they gave us some really good advice about how to make sure that information could be added to, but how it could also be made valuable to people in the future. And we were really fortunate to have those conversations because they've helped in all sorts of new and different ways. One of the things that they advised us to do was to basically have almost like a unique event ID. So every event was a particular place in time. So if you imagine a fireworks display as event 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, next year, it'll still be event 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we'll have a different performance of it. And that's been incredibly useful because what it does is it allows us to go back in time and understand the impact of particular events on the surrounding areas, and the history, and also all of those different things. So you don't always know where your data is going to go and what it's going to become, but if you really think quite carefully about how you're going to collect it, I think that's a pretty good place to start.
It's really interesting. So we were saying earlier on that we work in completely different areas, but there are still sort of overlaps. It's really interesting. So you were talking about how the things you don't know, or the things that you're sort of realizing. And certainly in all of our work, what we find is humans have all sorts of stories to tell. And during the course of the filming in the studio, and you're exploring themes with people, we have a very robust methodology leading up to the filming, but when you're actually in a studio with people, they will reveal things that you don't expect them to say. And people in that moment, when they feel that this is their moment to share evidence, information, something about themselves, they will reveal things that you weren't expecting them to. And there's certainly during the work with Holocaust survivors, even though we'd heard a lot of their testimony many, many times, each of them revealed something that nobody had heard before. Some of them even revealed things that they said they did not want sharing during their lifetime, and it would have to be kept and preserved until after they passed away, because it was too painful for them to have publicly revealed whilst they were still alive. And even when we're working with sort of more sort of commercial applications, people are very they reveal things, and then you have to work with what is that new information? You know, where does it go from there? What do you do with that? What other questions does it prompt? So you might have expectations about data, which then reveals other things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never a straightforward process, as I said, but it's very interesting always. So how do you know a certain archive or a certain data set has some value in it, and it's okay to say no as the answer? Do you want to?
Okay. We didn't realize the full value of what we had, but we've come to realize the value through conversations with people. There's two things that we do, I think, which are important in uncovering the new values of the data. And obviously, I was taking the mickey a bit with Ed Sheeran. There were lots of conversations around that helped us understand the value of our data. But just going out and talking to people, talking to different businesses, talking to different verticals, just getting the idea out there. And that's one thing that we found is fascinating. If you can get an idea out there of something powerful, people come up with all sorts of different ideas. I mean, within about 2 minutes of talking this morning when we met, you were like, oh, I know someone you should talk to. Oh, I could see how this could be useful. And actually, there were conversations that we'd maybe had some of, but actually things we had not thought about. And getting ideas out there is really powerful. One of the other things we do is we make sure that our API is a sandbox. It's free to play. We want people to come in and experiment and to mess around and get things wrong and not be punished for it. We want them to play as much as anything else, because play is where fantastic ideas come from, we find. So,
I think in terms of us, I think one of the interesting things is that value from the point of view of human stories is obviously not just about the information, it's about who is giving that information to you, how are they giving it to you, what's the emotion behind that story, how is it shared with you, and the context in which you're seeing that story in, whether that's in a historical context or whether it's a more sort of commercial context, but that affects how the audience, as a questioner, will interact with that person, and it also affects the value that they'll get out of it, which might be a personal value and not just obviously a value about the data itself.
That sounds amazing. So I'm just going to dive into one of the questions because it relates to what you've just been talking about. So digital archives that are just decades old have been lost, and some say our age will be a new dark age. How are you preserving records that preserve memories? So maybe like a long-term vision, perhaps, if you want to start with that.
Well, I actually think one of the key things is not just about how it's preserved, but how are you actually recording how it was preserved at the time. There are a lot of issues around deep fake issues, authenticity, and we've put processes in place to be able to demonstrate provenance, accuracy, no matter who we're working with. And I think that's a really important part of protecting this sort of information for the future, being able to demonstrate that and evidence these people were in the studio at this time, how the questions were asked in the studio, why they were asked, and which questions were matched to which answers, and having a robust record of that, so that it's not just about the data that you've collected, but it's about the evidence of how that data was collected.
Yeah, I think, well, I said already, we realized we were creating a cultural record for all time. And I think that's been a real driver. The ethos of the list has always been to spread arts and culture as far and as wide as possible. But we want to do that going back in time as well as forward in time. Most of what we do is about collecting data in the future, but having a really strong record of everything that happens in the past is important. And we're involved in some fantastic conversations with people like the Edinburgh Fringe as well, who have all of these incredible data sets, not necessarily digital data sets, but past reviews, past shows, all these old brochures. And we've made sure that we never lose anything. We never delete a review whilst we hide all of our past events from Google so people can't find them easily because they'll just get confused otherwise. Everything is there basically, and it's recorded in servers, and it's also just available out on the web if you know where to look and how to look for it. So we're pretty confident that those data sets will exist in perpetuity. I think the really interesting thing is how those data sets begin to interact with other data sets. So as an example, if you're recording an artist, so let's say Beyonce, okay? You've got an interview with Beyonce asking lots of questions. Where I think it's really interesting is actually we can go back and we can track Beyonce over a period of time, and we can track the venues that she acts in. You can record all of the reviews as well, and you can merge all of those things together, and you can chart the rise and fall and rise again of various artists. And there's something really fascinating about how all of these things interlock, and the power of data to do that, because we have a tag of Beyonce, and once we do that, we can pull together all of these listings, all of these reviews, all of these periods of time, and we can attribute them to a fantastic interview as well. So I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great that you're actually making that data permanently available, because as a researcher, one of my hats, really appreciate it when people actually share their data, because you can find insights that perhaps the company didn't think about because you're wanting to answer a completely different question.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna ask this question, but I hope I can summarize this in the right way. So tech is presented as being able to connect people, contribute to the economic growth, and build communities. Do social, economic, and other entrenched exclusions just magically then disappear?
Sorry.
Sorry. I think the question is trying to ask that there's a lot of promise with technology and what we can do, but does that mean that sometimes people are still excluded? It's not always kind of this magic that's kind of being sold. So do you?
I'd like to think what we will do will help everybody. I genuinely believe that. The list is a small company, only 25 people, but we're still part owned by the guy who put it together essentially all that time ago. And I said that ethos to spread arts and culture as far as wide as possible is there. So there will be different values that we put within data. So for example, it's completely free for any venue to give us their events information, and we will spread that information for them completely cost-free, because we wouldn't exist without all the amazing people putting on all these incredible shows and doing these fantastic things. But there will be cases where people have to pay to access for that. So using an example, if we are going to help drive a hotel's revenues up by 10% a year, then there is a value we have to attribute to that. And we have to do that because we have to be paid. The old publishing model is sadly broken. We used to make all our money from the circulation sales of a magazine. That's zero these days. So it's about, I think, trying to find a balance. Our website is completely free to access. Anybody can go and look and find out future information by themselves. We're completely free to any venue who wants to use us. But if we can find interesting ways of helping people advance their businesses or make their businesses more efficient, then I think there is a value to that. And if we don't do that, we won't exist as a business, so we can't do all those good things for people. So yes. Yes and no, I think. Yes, we absolutely want to make it available to everybody, and we do that in ways. But there are also times as well where that data has such value that I think actually people should pay for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what goes into making a data-driven experience valuable? So how do you create it in a way that does not feel too contrived? And I might present that to you, Sarah.
I think one of the key things is thinking about us as human beings, and that technology should be supporting how we achieve things, and all the stuff that was covered yesterday as well. That I think for us, focusing on it as a human experience and an intuitive experience, and developing things in a way which works with how people actually work. That's why I think voice interaction and voice recognition is obviously such an important part of how technology will develop going forward and how it is developing now. I think making that really seamless is really, really challenging, and I do have worries about areas around uncanny valley and deep fakes, etc., and how do we relate to that, and what is the trust between these products and the people who are using them and these experiences. And I think the more we can work to make things authentic and human, and to connect people through technology rather than with technology, the more deep those experiences will be.
That makes sense.
Just out of interest, would you ever consider opening things out to, like, so, I don't know, creating an Alexa skill for this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different applications for what we're doing, and we have got a lot of interest in us and what we're doing and applying that to different platforms, which is very doable from where we are now. But I think we also have to be very careful. We are focused on being authentic, being real, and people need to know that what we are doing is connecting with real footage from real people. It's not recreated people, so we don't have to worry too much about uncanny valley problems. And I think that makes a big difference. So I think if we stray too much outside that, we'll damage what we're doing, which is all about the authenticity.
Yeah. So kind of related, how good at machine learning and recommendations algorithm at offering inspiration that's outside of your bubble? And I might point to you.
Well, that's a good question. I've been involved in discussions with the Fringe around this. There's a fascinating piece of work that they're undergoing at the moment. I think it's called the unrecommendation engine, because what they want is they want people to experience something a little bit outside their comfort range, but you can't go too far outside someone's comfort range. And the head of marketing at the Fringe is a fantastic guy, Ollie, and he talks about this experience he had with a bunch of corporate clients, and he took them to see Tapeface, basically, because he was like, well, that's pretty safe, it's not going to offend anybody, and that'll be absolutely fine. And this corporate group came out there and they went, oh my God, that was on the edge, I've never seen anything like that. And he was just, you have no idea what is out there in the Fringe if that's kind of surprised or shocked you in any way. So it is a really interesting problem around how you suggest things that people don't want to see. And arts and culture in particular is really complex for that, because at any one point in time, I might be interested in a Public Enemy gig for myself because I love old school hip hop. I might be looking at ballet for my wife, or I might be looking at a children's comedian who farts a lot for my 5-year-old daughter who thinks that's the funniest thing in the entire world. So because of those things, all of those things are of interest to me at the same time. But actually beginning to build an algorithm that recommends all three of those things to me is quite a complex thing to do. And people, I think someone that's done it quite well is Spotify. And what Spotify do is they look for connections between people. Loads of the services that went before them looked for connections within the music and same sort of style of music, same beats per minute, same sort of use of guitars. But what Spotify did was like, well, actually, if you like this band here, loads of people who like this band as well. So if you like LCD Sound System, you might like this band over here that aren't immediately connected, but in some way they appeal to the same audiences. And they've looked at people's relationships between music, and that's how they've built their recommendation. And it's not necessarily something that's immediately obvious, but it's an understanding of what other people around like. And I think that works quite well in terms of recommendation. So I think there's a lot of human links as well. And if you can develop those, then I think you have something really powerful when you match that up with machine learning technology and algorithmic work, certainly.
I think in terms of getting out of the comfort zone, I think, some of the issues that we'd have, things that we need to think about, we're very much focused on working with people who are inspiring, who are role models, who have a sort of positive impact, and that's what we want to do. And that is what we are doing. But obviously there's a question as to, if we're recording witnesses of history, should you also be recording perpetrators? For a historical record, what is the attitude to that? How important is that in the context of what we're doing, and how do we feel about doing that? So, if the question was about sort of what's outside the comfort zone, I think there's a whole area there that is worthy of consideration going forward.
That is really interesting because so many. Clearly, these are things which people can't understand, they can't comprehend. But there's actually probably someone on the other end who still thinks they maybe even did the right thing, and trying to get inside their head and understand how they could make those incredible decisions is a fascinating
And in the
thing.
context of that sort of witness and historical research, particularly with these sort of one-to-one interviews, you are uncovering, they are witness statements.
Yeah.
And if you are using these techniques to uncover those statements and stories, then you have to consider the breadth as well as the depth. And one of the reasons why in the historical context, the Holocaust Museum recorded 10 stories, and not just, which was very, it's very expensive, and not just 2, was that the answers to people's questions, you don't want one person's voice to be the record of an event. So,
yeah, that's fascinating.
So have you ever come across data that you thought shouldn't be archived when you were just talking about that? Or it could be a story that you thought, well, maybe that you don't want it to be told, or something that you thought that might be exploited in a bad way. And if so, when you were in that, what decision did you make? Because it's quite tricky, because you don't want to kind of censor anything. And you want people to be able to tell the full story. So have you ever been in that kind of difficult situation?
When we were doing a lot of the work on sort of sensitive subjects, we had a very strict guidance for ourselves at the beginning that we would not, we'd ask the questions, that answer was given to that question, and that was the answer that was recorded. I think once you start getting into a sense of editing or overly curating, that can stray into quite dangerous territory. Maybe that answer, should we ask that again a couple of times, because maybe they could add this in. Those are their statements and what they're saying, and I think there's something very important there about, again, authenticity and a record and how you use that. And I think having that ethical backdrop and understanding of what you're doing in no matter what field, whether it's sort of commercial, cultural, historical, is actually really important. Because you build up that trust with the person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you come across that? Do you think like somebody might be using that data in a bad way, and has that ever been a concern?
I have absolutely no doubt that somebody will think of a bad way to use that data. Okay, I can think of one off the top of my head. It could be somebody, we're working on a lot of different things in terms of event capacities and predictions of where large groups of people are going to be. It doesn't take too much of a jump to think that there are people who would like to know where large groups of people are going to be so they can do something bad to them. Data is neither good nor bad. It's the people who use it and what they use it for that's good or bad. But that will be that's always the case with any form of technology. So I don't think that you should ever limit what you do based on the thought of what might be.
This is an interesting question. So, will there be a time that consumers keep the memories of dead relatives alive using machine learning and VR? This is a classic Black Mirror episode. Yeah. And if so, what ethical implications will this have? I think this is a perfect question.
So, some of the people we've worked with have passed away.
Yeah.
So we have preserved that. But one of the key things that some of the subjects we work with said was that was one of their reasons for sharing it. They wanted their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren to be able to connect with their story, particularly when there were things that they felt they personally, it was too painful for them to share in person with them, and this gave them an opportunity to share all of that without having the pain of doing that in person. There are ethical issues around that, I think, but more difficult. I know there are organisations and companies exploring, for example, how you use somebody's social media data to recreate themselves as an avatar after they've passed away, which is really interesting. Personally, I wouldn't want my social media profile to be the thing that was left. I'd think I was just obsessed with, cat videos for the whole of my life, which would be really worrying. But yes, it's definitely something that needs to be thoughtfully considered.
Yeah. Just on the topic of ethics, so when you are collecting data or trying to understand something, how do you make sure that it's inclusive, that you haven't left anybody out, or that you're not overly representing a certain type of person or demographic?
we would love to collect more information than we do. The things we're limited by are the ability of our technology to collect and just simply the number of people that we actually have in the business at any one point in time. But we're open to anyone, so anybody can upload information to us. It has to be fact-checked by us because there's a lot of very bored 15-year-old boys out there to send you all sorts of false events. And during the festival as well, one of the things we really notice is that comedians start coming into our system and they cancel like their rival comedian shows and stuff like that just to annoy them. Like, they're good friends, but they just do it to wind them up. So, but we have this ability for anyone to provide information, and that's completely open. There's no judgment on there. For us, every event is important. We place, and interestingly, even within the search, we place equal weight on Beyonce and Jay-Z at the O2 as we do the local community jumble sale in the Scout Hut. For us, all events are equal. Now, clearly, some of those events have much more interest to partners that we want to sell them to than others. But in terms of the way that we actually collect information, yeah, it's completely open and free. So I would hope in that way that we don't have any particular bias. I'm sure that biases exist, undoubtedly. I know for a fact, for example, that we have less Bollywood films on there that we should do, because a lot of those are shown in, say, like local mosques or something else like that, or places of worship, or all sorts of things who might not necessarily use us, but actually we would love to have that information. It's a fantastic source. So yeah, we would love to take as much information as we possibly can.
Okay. I think we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask both of you one last question. So the deep ocean remains one of the most unexplored places known to humans. They say that we only explored 5% of the deep sea, and much is still unknown. Do you think there is an equivalent in terms of data? I mean, what kind of data do you think we really should be exploring more of?
Okay, I'm going to just focus on events data because that's probably the thing I know the most about. But whilst we've got the most comprehensive set of live events data, we're still only scratching the surface. We've conceived of a project to build an ontology around live events information so that we can use machine learning to automatically process all the information that comes through press releases. And we get thousands of press releases every single week, and there's no way we can do everything that we want to with them, but we'd love to find a way to actually automatically import all of that information and the descriptions and the directors and the lighting and everything else, because we understand that the more information we have about an event, the more valuable it becomes. To give it an example, a 10,000 person Nicola Benedetti kind of classical conference is going to have a very different impact on high-end hotels and restaurants and bars than a 10,000 person Liam Gallagher concert, which is going to have a high impact on like the particular type of bar, the police, ambulance, blue light services, and everything else. So the more information that we can begin to extract, then the more valuable that piece of data is. And that depth just goes so far in terms of events. Understanding the complete history of an artist across a period of maybe sort of 20 years or even longer. There's so much depth there that we would love to mine and access and understand. So yeah, once you start collecting, you can just keep on going further and further and further down the rabbit hole. It's an interesting place to end up.
And sort of building on some of that, I think we evolved as a species through storytelling and passing on information from person to person. And from our point of view, there's such richness and depth in each individual's experience. And if we can capture that and make that accessible to people, that is part of the ocean that hasn't yet been explored.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I hope you've all learned a lot. So just a hand for our panelists here.